Hello and welcome to the flip side of adversity. I am Dr. Veirdre Jackson, the CEO and creative of Living Strong Consulting. So, as we wrap up Mental Health Awareness Month, let's pause and recognize how are we actually prioritizing our mental wellness? Are you juggling more than your mind can actually manage? Holding on to relationships that have actually expired, staying loyal to coping skills that actually no longer help you but are actually holding you stuck. It's time to shift. Let's not just talk about what trauma is, but how to actually heal from it. We are getting ready to go into part two with Brandon Brown. Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's get into it right here on the flip side. We'll be right back. Trauma, toxic stress, broken habits, and hurting heart don't define destiny, but peace isn't passive. It requires an exchange. To create a flip and access peace in the middle of the pieces, you are challenged to make an exchange of the lies that have kept you mentally hostage in basement moments. Resilience isn't about bouncing back, but bouncing forward. Living Strong, the flip side of adversity, brings powerful stories and fearless conversations from experts in the field of business, relationships, emotional, physical, and mental health, and faith-based communities. Each episode creates a brave space with powerful tools from authentic connections. Tune in as we dig in with Dr. Jackson on the flip side of adversity. Hello, Brandon Brown.
Dr. Jackson, how are you? I'm willing to do your voiceover.
Oh
I can do it
goodness.
like James
Here you,
or
here you
like Pee
go.
Wee Herman.
Here you
I,
go.
I can do it.
No, that's
I'm just saying.
that's exactly why you have not been hired to do it.
I'm
That
just.
reason right there. That
You
reason
know
right
how
there.
many?
You know what?
It's okay. Let's stop because I know you still got your 23 questions.
I do. And I even had the nerve to add in some new ones.
But wait. I was. There was something that you said in the beginning of your piece when you were talking about not necessarily focusing on trauma, but focusing on healing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been sitting with this thought. Um, what if you're what if you're waiting for an apology for someone that you're never going to get it from? So should it be that part of your healing is just accepting the fact that you're never going to get that apology?
You know what? For me, I've actually been in that place and I've kind of cloaked that with a heart of forgiveness because like
Uh-huh.
forgiveness isn't about whether or not the person says that they're sorry. It's actually about me releasing myself from whatever pain caused them to create the hurt, the offense, or the damage. And so for me, being able to release myself from an apology that I'm never going to get started with the journey of forgiveness and setting my own self free.
Uh-huh. Because I think, and I'm pretty sure at some point in time we'll talk about it, but I think people need to understand that when we're talking about trauma or healing, that it is really about a sense of self-power.
Hmm.
Oftentimes what happens is we are giving our power away, expecting something in return, right?
True.
So sometimes it's not about the apology. It's literally perhaps just saying, you know what, I'm okay, right? I kind of think of it as Senator Maxine Waters, like I'm reclaiming my time. But I think I've sort of amended that by saying I'm reclaiming myself.
Mm,
right? You had something that belongs to me that I'm taking back.
yeah. That's such a powerful reflection and thought that I don't think most people have done the work to be okay enough with themselves to actually recognize that they are worthy and that they have the right to take back their power. Like someone else doesn't deserve to hold on to their power, that it's something that is theirs. But do people actually do the work internally, emotionally, mentally, spiritually to recognize that?
What if what if we're getting this wrong?
Okay.
What if we really have to look at this, and this is it's not being controversial, but it's just a
Hmm.
question. What if, as it relates to our ancestors, right, that were transported and are in that, you know, Australia, Brazil, America, England, right, and then they had to go through that piece,
Hmm.
right, servitude, slavery, and what I'm trying to figure out as what I am starting to notice is how much time it takes for somebody to get comfortable with a conversation. And I'm starting to notice that, or I'm wondering if the time that it takes to get comfortable with the conversation is really rooted in them not competing with, but hearing their ancestors talking to them. Kind
Mm.
of saying, like, this is our family tradition. This isn't what we do. You know, you're talking about forgiveness, but we talk about lickbacks. You know, like you talk about safety and security, and we just talk about moving forward, right? So I'm curious. So the bigger thing, because oftentimes when you say it, it elicits so much response, is you have that concept, post-slave traumatic syndrome,
Hmm.
right? And I'm just wondering if at some point in time would it be necessary to just sort of understand how the way that we operate now would have been a death sentence back then.
Absolutely. I think it is acknowledging it so that we can begin to break things that have been passed to us that no longer serve us. They had a reason, a purpose then for safety, but they don't have a purpose now. But we would have to be willing to actually um, break down or break apart what is something that has been given to me that is no longer serving me. But again, I feel like that comes back to my relationship with me. And
Hmm.
even for me, my faith is foundational. And so even considering like what is it that God has called me to do? What has God called me to be? And the things that are not serving me, in order for me to stand on the shoulders of those who have paid such a tremendous cost, in order for me to move forward, not continue to repeat their same patterns, but learn from what happened, acknowledge, honor, hold it sacred, but not let it hold me back, because there's things that I need to be released from in order to move forward into my next. And sometimes I agree. I feel like we repeat things that were given to us that are no longer serving us and actually are holding us hostage.
I think um, I think we might have crafted another conversation for us.
We
Think
don't
about it.
have
No,
that many left.
no, no, no. In general, because really I'm sitting in a space that I feel like a lot of people are emotional hoarders,
Mm.
but you're coming out of a space of being an emotional minimalist. right?
Mm-hmm.
So to go from a hoarder to a minimalist is huge, right? It's talking about letting go of things that you didn't even know you were holding on to, right? So, because I do a lot of work with kids,
Mm-hmm.
and when I'm trying to explain to other adults, I'm saying the behavior that I'm seeing is not their behavior. They pick the behavior up from the adults, right? The kids haven't even really figured out what they're doing, but they know how to copy.
Mm-hmm.
They know how to look and wonder, right? So then the question becomes, how do you tell someone that the person that they've been emulating, who probably has been emulating someone else, who has been emulating someone else, who has been emulating someone else, that is no longer good for them, right? So that for me, that's that whole notion of family tradition. And I think sometimes like we are so even even within the mental health space, we are bound by family tradition. Like me and you were talking, but it's not like we're going to talk about our family stuff because family stuff is supposed to be kept to the
Well,
heart.
actually, no, no, that's not true because actually, I remember at the end of our last episode, it is the
Yeah, yeah,
first thing at the top of this episode is that you shared with me that there is an experience connected to your own father and
right.
hearing I love you that for whatever that experience was is that it is still resonating with you. So I'm curious.
So, um, this is a very interesting conversation because his homegoing anniversary is tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
He passed in '03, right? And I playfully say that, I had the father from fences, right?
Mm-hmm.
My father was from the South. He came up here. So it was, in my older years, I have started to see that he was very spiritual, right? Though he didn't really go to church, he was very spiritual. That whole notion of iron sharpens iron,
Mm-hmm.
right? But what I took that to mean is that my father didn't give out compliments a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but he would tell you what you could do better, which is actually something that I see in myself that I fight on an ongoing basis. So we have to understand that, that's huge. Now, um, let's fast forward. So I had started to notice something was up with him, or actually with my mother and father. I couldn't really figure it out because I'm the baby. So I noticed my mother had told me like there were some challenges. She had told me that his health was in a different space, and so without even really thinking about it, I just kind of quit my job and became his caregiver. I really didn't think about it. Caregiving is something completely different that we won't talk about, but like I was raised with no PDA. Like PDA was bad, right? And I was raised both listening to my father and experiencing my father, just on how things are supposed to be done. But my father wasn't really big. He loved my mother. You could tell because you heard it. Like you could see it. Like they had known each other for more than 40 years. Been married for more than 40 years, had known each other for more than 50 years. And you could still see my father get jealous. It was the most beautiful thing, meaning that he didn't take anything for granted. So now let's fast forward this because I don't want to take up too much at a time. So he had dementia, right? And what I noticed was that the dementia was almost allowing him
Mm-hmm.
emotional free.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm taking him from his one of his doctor's appointments, and he's just laughing. I was like, "Oh, what are you laughing about?" He says, "Oh, I'm just laughing." And then he goes, "I love you." Now I'm pushing the wheelchair, and it happened to be a bench. So I sat on the bench. I don't recall
Mm.
just I don't recall my father actually saying that like in an unelicited way.
Mhm.
But there was power in the way that he said it, that it left me pretty much like speechless for a minute. And I had to take a couple minutes just to gather myself, right? Now this was in '03, so this is before we're talking, like all of the importance of mental health. But I got struck with a question. Do I have to come down with some uh, mental incapacity to be emotionally free, right? And with that, that's when I was like, I have to figure out how this is going to look different. I have to figure out how does someone from an urban setting with urban traditions and urban understandings, how do how do I figure out how to be authentic, right, without it appearing to be fake,
Mhm.
right? And I have sort of like a similar piece to this. So, I do work with a lot of adults in some of the educational settings. And Dr. J, somebody said something to me last week that I thought was amazing. I had been working with someone for 4 years. And I was like, we were just having a conversation. And I said, so when did the stuff that I was trying to get you to understand, when did it really sink in? He said, oh, about a year and a half ago. I was like, a year and a half ago? We've been talking for 4 years. He says, yeah, but I had to get to a place where I believed you.
Absolutely.
And I was like, wow. And
Absolutely.
he was like, I needed to understand that. And it wasn't even so much about the information, it was the authenticity of me that was actually being questioned. He was trying to understand if all of this was like a
A
charade.
show. Mhm. A show, yeah.
Like if I was doing things in a particular way because that's what I was getting paid to do. And I was like, look, I've just been blessed to get paid to do something that I truly believe in.
Mhm.
But it was interesting for me to hear because I did start to notice our relationship changed,
Mhm.
right? Now, if we had to look at this gender wise, I don't know if a female would have taken that long because when I look at the females that I've worked with, they seem to become akin if we're willing to work on a problem or a situation together, right? So they're willing to give me just a little bit more latitude. But with the men, because this had, me, I'm always giving myself questions. Because when he said that to me, I had to say, I was like, so let me sit there and really think about how long maybe it has taken men to just understand the basics. And we're talking about self care, we're talking about breathing, we're talking about being grounded, versus how long it would take a woman to do that. Now, I think some of it is socialization, right? But to me, it was very fascinating. So I told myself, I don't want to wait until I'm like 79 and hopefully I won't get dementia, but I don't want to be in a place where I've held on to so much
Yeah.
where what I need to say could have helped so many other individuals.
Along the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to be careful not to generalize because I feel like yes, um the general conversation is that it does take men longer, or the ability to be more vulnerable, to allow themselves, we talked about in our last conversation, really
Mhm.
connecting with their feelings and being able to express that and connect with the strategies. I agree that traditionally it takes longer, but I'm curious about the level of pain. I don't know that there's a particular amount of time. I feel like it is the statement that you said is powerful, even going back to the question you asked, like, how do we tell someone that something they're holding on to is no longer serving them? I think it
Mhm.
comes through safety and trust of a relationship, even in the relationship that we have with ourselves. The safety and trust within ourselves and the safety and trust of connecting with others. I think about my own story that I referenced earlier. I had been deeply hurt and I was holding on to the things that the person had told me I was not. And
Mm.
it was when I really reconciled who I was apart from what the person had repeatedly told me over and over again and had diminished my perspective of who I was. When I reconciled that within myself, I changed as a friend, as a ministry leader, as a parent, and that vulnerability of doing the work in safety and in trust with others, it really began to happen. It literally exploded. That all happened before we ever met. Like, all of that had to happen before we even met each other at Lakeside. I was a completely different person. The shell, the hardness that was on me wouldn't even allow me to accept or receive relationships. But that started with the root of me not even being okay with me. And I had to, with my faith, get to a place of being willing to be vulnerable with myself, to be safe with myself, to trust my God. And in that journey, things began to break off. But I think externally, it has to be connected to safety and trust because that vulnerability is so vitally important to healing. And I wanted to ask, so what do you think? You're saying you're wondering whether or not it's time. I'm wondering what makes it so difficult in the experience for men and boys to really access that vulnerable place, to tap into safety, to tap into trust, to accelerate this.
Um, so, before I say anything, I have to say that the conversation between Dr. Jackson and I is for educational purposes only and is not meant to serve as therapy in any way, shape, or form. Should we say anything that makes you feel a particular way, we hope you go seek and you seek someone. I say that in jest, but I think if
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
you really want to sit there for a second, then I have to ask you this question: are men raised to be vulnerable? And can you put vulnerable and male in the same sentence? We
I think
talked
you
about this.
can.
We talked about this a little this week. If a little boy falls, we tell him to get up and brush it off. If a little girl falls, we pick him up, hold him tight, and tell him everything's going to be okay. Right? So there is a toxic understanding that masculinity, though some of us recognize that vulnerability is actually stronger than being able to take a hit. But sometimes, or not sometimes, but many of us have equated masculinity with strength, with virility, right? So when you think about it, it's the concept of masculinity could be very vast, but over generation to generation, or just how things um, have been stunted, right? There are just certain things that I would argue most people do not see as a manly thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I even I look at how I'm always struck how people, because I think women do this as well. You claim to have a best friend, but they still don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
You claim to have a best friend, but they've never seen that ugly cry, right? So, like, are you saying that you have this person in your life as sort of like a checkbox? or are you really allowing that person to fulfill what they're supposed to do, right? So it is easy for us to sit here and say that men should be vulnerable. Um, we could easily say that, vulnerability would definitely sort of deconstruct, reconstruct the construct of masculinity, right? So that masculinity could actually also include words like vulnerability, nurturing, right? Because that's the
Hmm.
other thing. Like and even in society, like when you talk about parents, right? Most times when you talk about the nurturing parent, you're referring to the mother, right? So that's why for me, being a single parent, I was like, so you telling me I can't be nurturing?
But you choose. You choose. Even in
No,
that moment, but even in that moment with your
Doctor.
father, yes, let me pause. Yes, I agree that systemically, socially, things are put upon us from a very young age. I
Mhm.
completely agree. But we do also, with with intentionality, we can create moments where we decide we are not going to repeat the same pattern. And
But
I'll tell you one thing that is resonating with me. So I was listening to a pastor talk about an exchange with his father. He was like he wanted nothing to do with the path that his father was on, which was he was a pastor. He was preaching the gospel. He wanted nothing of that. And there was a moment in time where his father called him over and for 5 hours spoke into his life what he saw was possible for him. It wasn't the life he was living, but he
Mhm.
spoke it over him. And that night, he passed away. And the thing that he held on to, he said he counted how many times in that 5 hour conversation his father said, I love you. And that was the thing he held on to. And so now that he is a father, he makes consistent intention to tell his sons, I love you, because he know there will be a day that they will also count. So he made, yes, it was an experience, it was powerful, but he made that shift, that turn, that decision that I'm not going to repeat the same thing that I experienced when I was younger. He gave something different to his children.
I got you, but I think that the challenge with both my story and the story that you shared is that we can't build it to scale, right? So it's so now we're saying like every male has to have some type of
No,
epiphany.
no,
No, no, no.
actually, no, I'm not actually saying an epiphany. I'm actually asking, as we think about this conversation, if we are given things that are an obstacle, things that are weights, things that are holding us back, what can we do to create, to support, to harness opportunities for people to experience something different? Like, what are those what tools, strategies, experiences, vulnerabilities do we offer people for them to be able to experience something different?
I think for me, if I had to look at this strictly from the male sense, but this could be for both sides, is I would probably ask one question like, why do you feel so heavy?
Mm-hmm.
Like how much that you're carrying, right? Which then could probably splinter into a conversation of how much are you carrying you control, versus how much you carrying that you have no control over. So that's a separate conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing where I get stuck is I think sometimes as a people we've become too literal, right? So we have that passage. When I was a child, I acted as a child, but when I became a man, I put away my childish things, right? And I don't think that that passage refers to putting away my joy,
Mm, absolutely.
because if you think about it, well, no, for those people that are literal, it would be like I'm no longer going to do the things that I did when I was a kid. But it's literally like throwing away the baby with the bathwater, right? Because in that, all that stuff that you're throwing out, you threw away the stuff that made you happy. You threw away the stuff that gave you joy, right? So oftentimes when I'm talking to people, and I'm like, well, what's your joy? Like, what are the things that make you happy? And when I come across people that are like, well, I don't know what makes me happy, like that's never real. I haven't really thought about it. When I go back and say, well, what are the things that you did when you were a kid? They were like, oh, well, I did this and I did this. And I was like, well, I'm just curious. How come you still can't do it anymore? And most times people will say, well, because, well, I was a kid when I did that. Yeah. But I still see people doing double dutch. I still see people playing jacks. Like, oh, please don't tell me that because of age, that there's certain things that you can't do to make you happy.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that is one of the questions. Because perhaps in our communities we raise our babies too young. I mean, too quick,
Oh, well,
right?
that's a whole conversation that children
We
have
do,
to grow up too
but
fast.
the whole thing is if our children are growing up too fast, then when are they going to do the emotional exploration and all that other stuff? They don't have time. And I get it. Poverty is a beast, right? But oftentimes I feel for the young people. I feel for the young boys in particular, right? Because they're being put even by play words, man, and stuff like that. It's like I just need you to be a kid, and for me that is the fundamental thing with regard to my mentoring program. I don't get caught up in the other stuff. I just want you to be a kid, and
Mm-hmm.
I want you to get your swag. And for me, the way that I define swag is that you just love yourself. But if nobody's talking about loving yourself, if love is always in an external experience, the only way that I experience love is I have to love someone else, then I don't know what it means to love. I'm starting, I see so many people that are afraid to be by themselves. And I'm like, what's your relationship with yourself?
So there's a whole, like, I heard like five different things. First is being willing to even sit with the question of what is making you feel so heavy. That in and of itself, at asking yourself that question or engaging in a conversation within a circle of those that you want to build safety and trust with, to begin to answer that question together and challenge one another. And then connecting with recognizing, like, what are those things that you are trying to control that you can't, that
Mm,
aren't meant for you to control. That's a whole
mm,
nother conversation. I think part of this is being willing to do the work to recognize and ask a different question. Are we asking a different question, or are we asking the same questions over and over again? And then you ask, so what brings you joy? And if you can't remember what brings you joy, go back to your childhood and then give yourself permission to explore it again. Not
mm,
that you have to be childish, but you're giving yourself permission, because when you love yourself, you recognize that you are worthy of pursuing things that bring you joy, that bring you love. And so all those, like those four really big but vulnerable questions, could lead people in really powerful conversations if they sit even with themselves, and or even better, sit with a safe circle of people to actually dialogue through it.
But here's my so yes to everything that you said. But if I had to come to this from a man's side, I'm like, well, how many people do you have that you can really be honest with, right?
I
I
find one.
I, I feel not to generalize like you said, but I feel like women have the blessings and the fortunate space to have people that perhaps the level of disclosure is very high,
Mm.
right? Um, I don't know, and I even have to be careful how I say this because I think things have changed from when we were kids to now.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So I'm referring to these people that are anywhere from 65 to 45, where it's like, yeah, I love you, but I'm not telling you everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that person that you can tell everything to, right? Then, like, again, that's some of that heavy that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can only imagine how difficult it is to be able to navigate spaces where you feel you can't talk to anyone. Because the moment that you show vulnerability, vulnerability is seen as weakness, and then weakness is seen as non masculine. So,
So I think though that we have to be, so one, I feel like things are getting better. Things are, the conversation with males around mental health and mental wellness is improving. By far, I do agree with you in that women do talk about it more. We create sister circles and we create all those things, absolutely. So it is different, but I do believe that men are, it is getting better for men, that with intentionality, creating spaces, authoring books, creating conversations around counseling and support is
mhm.
increasing in spaces for men, and specifically Black men as well. And so I think it's improving. We can't say that they've caught up, but um, you referenced something in the materials you sent us in this concept of an ecosystem. And you referenced the ecosystem of trauma, but is it possible to cultivate an ecosystem of healing?
Oh, absolutely.
What does that look like?
Well, if I had to, um, if I had to sort of describe it, so I'm a visual person.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're putting yourself, like almost think of like a wheel, right? And you're the center of that wheel. But each of the spokes is a different connection to something,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we literally could take the 8 dimensions of wellness and just make each of those a spoke. So we're talking about like how are you with yourself intellectually? How are you with yourself employment wise? How are you with yourself physically? How are you with yourself spiritually? How are you with yourself socially? Right? We could make all of those apart because I think oftentimes what happens with love, with the words love, masculinity, um, we give it a very, very narrow definition
Mm-hmm.
instead of giving it the whole definition, right? So the whole thing is that if I'm trying to heal, I have to make myself and I have to acknowledge that I need to heal, right? So, friends of mine have had, death in their family, or their spouse have died, and I attempt to just sort of sit with them just to kind of say like, how are you doing? And regardless of whatever it is, regardless of the relationship that I have with that person, I still get the same answer. Like, I'm okay. Now, you know me, that's one of the words that I don't press, but I
Right.
do,
You share with
I'll,
us.
ex-
We can
I'll
use that one.
but I'll accept it in certain spaces, right? Because for me, like, okay, all right, good, fine. I'm starting to feel like those are like emotional cuss words.
Mm.
Like if you think about it, like sometimes people cuss because they don't have they've never
They don't
been
have the
given the
words.
practice to say the right words. So it's like, yeah, we're gonna do that, but like I feel like so many people, and if I had to make this on, if I had to, I'm not speaking for men, all men, but I'm just wondering, like if men have to sit on this for so long, like they're told, like you are not supposed to cry, right? How much how like what how is that message then interpreted? That then how do you have an emotional release?
Mhm.
Oh, I guess your emotional release is now marijuana, drugs, pills,
Mhm.
whatever. Because if you can't let it out, I guess you're gonna put something in,
Mhm.
right? So it's I think I think when we're talking about the ecosystem, I think it's about not that your healing occurs in one place, but that it's allowed to occur in all the places that you are. And that those places, spaces, people that you are with are either directly or indirectly contributing to your healing.
Mhm. Mhm. When I think about the context of being able to heal, and in a time that we're in right now with such a grind culture, so things have to move so fast, so hard. um how can we actually redefine this conversation? You had mentioned it earlier, redefining this conversation of strength in a
Mhm.
healing journey, when like the grind culture, and I find this in women as well, like this grind culture is so hard. Like we've got to hold it all together, we've got to muscle our way through, you got to be the strong black woman, you got. How do we redefine strength in the context of a healing journey? Because I think on both ends of the continuum of gender, that the culture that we're in is such, you got to hold it together, you got to push through, um forces us to think of strength in one context, when I feel like it could be so multidimensional in a journey of healing.
I think all of our words would have to be redefined. Vulnerability, masculinity, strength, love, compassion, empathy, anger, right? Because it's very interesting. Like, it's okay for a man to say that they're angry, but you would not expect a man to say he feels accomplished or he feels tender, right? That's what, remember last time I said,
Mm-hmm.
I equate that men grew up with the 9 box of crayons, but women had the 120, right? Like there are only certain words that we can use, and we can only use them in a certain context, right? And I think, and it's I would kind of want to sit with something that you talked about earlier. Like things have changed, but I feel like sometimes we have to acknowledge that perhaps what dad or grandpa said doesn't really apply right now.
Mm-hmm.
But then, that's we got to be careful with that, because that's when we get into family tradition, right? And
Well, just because it's a tradition doesn't mean that it has to continue.
so you say that from a space, because I know that you have been freed.
Mm-hmm.
So I would ask you to then consider everyone that just heard you say that and be like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And see, so I'm very cautious with everything that I do. I'm very cautious. Like people are trying to like push me to have what I consider to be very opening but very dangerous conversations with men around um, mental health. But for me, it's sort of like if you're not comfortable in the basics, like if I can barely get you through algebra, why are we going to physics, right?
So
And
I
if we're talking about this, like, and if we're trying to make the equation, so like the basics is, safety.
mhm.
Um, let's just say that safety but I can't, if you're barely dealing with safety, I can't talk to you about shame, guilt, right? I can't talk to you about, how your your concept of relationship is unhealthy because you've never had a healthy definition of self, right? So it's like I would love to have those conversations, but I'm also fearful because for me, I try to look at my things that I would rather have a little bit of impact than a whole lot of injury.
so when I think of traveling into spaces and helping people prepare, going back to what you said earlier, I think we have to recognize that that's not going to happen in a workshop. That has to
No.
happen in relationship. And so if the person needs to understand safety, they have to experience it, not
Hmm.
just get the definition of it. And so
Right.
that it does require time. And we've come full circle with 7 minutes left to the
This
conversation.
is ridiculous.
Come
We
full
need we need a
circle.
3 hour conversation because
We've
this is
come full
impossible.
circle. It is. It's 7 minutes up. We have come full circle to, you're like, how much time does it take? I don't think we can put a clock on it, but we have
Mm-mm.
to put relationship on it. It's not a
But can I say?
workshop.
But can I say this though?
Hmm.
I think that oftentimes, so I look at like safety and everything else, like people look at weight loss,
Oh,
right?
hmm.
And what I try to get people to understand with weight loss is like when you first start, you're going to lose the water weight, right? You're going to lose the waste weight, the stuff that's in your colon, and in your intestines, right? But the true journey of weight loss is after you've gotten rid of all of that, it's just the little increments that you make. And oftentimes I feel that when people are in these journeys, like when people go into our conversations, like they are expecting epiphany. They are expecting sort of like you to say something and like the spotlight hit them from the front and the back. But in truth, and in the most humble way to say this, like, because you say relations, like relationships, I sit in a place like, what's your relationship with yourself?
Absolutely.
Like, how honest, like, how honest are you with yourself? Because if you tell yourself that you're good, you're lying to yourself because you know that you're not good, right? And I think it's sort of like just learning how to build things. I'm all about planting seeds, right? I try to plant seeds in
Yeah,
all the conversations just so that people, at some point in time, the seed will blossom. And I think it works differently for different people. It's just, for
absolutely.
people that want to heal, it's like for people that want to retire. You have a plan for retirement, you have to have a plan for healing, right? Or you have to at least have the intentionality to happen. You just can't wake up and say, "Oh, I'm healed." Now that might sit in spiritual places like you can, but what we're talking about is like you really have to be honest with yourself. Um, and sometimes you have to say, "You know what? I am not okay." Right? And I'm good with that. Do you have somebody that you can say,
That's the part.
I'm weird. I'm sad. Like, do you have anybody that you can talk to?
But that's the part. I feel like you get to that place in the context of not only relationship with yourself, but sometimes you have to hold space with someone who may be farther along in the journey than you are. And not that you want what they have, but you realize what they have is something that you could have too. And you are willing, open in this relationship to just hold space with them. And there'll be a moment where you're asking different questions. And because it's been an experience where in the space with that person, you've heard that
Mhm.
question. When you get home, you ask that question of yourself. It does take time. It is not a light switch. And we went into this saying to people, this isn't going to be like some, like, oh wow, I need the. And I think oftentimes people are like, just give me the tip, just give me the tool for my tool belt, and that's not what
Mhm.
this is. But I
Mhm.
want to ask my closing question because we only have a few minutes. Because we're on part two, what is your vision for what healing could look like as people continue to move through this journey of awareness? So we've been having these two awareness conversations.
Mhm.
If you could cast vision, we're in part two, we have one more conversation together. What what's your vision for what healing could look like as people are actually moving from this place of awareness and moving up the steps of growth?
Healing is awareness. Healing is embracing the ugly cry. Healing is um, loving people that you can no longer have in your space. Healing is learning how to be alone and being happy with that. Healing is when memories no longer have power and dominion over you.
Right
That's
there.
I
Right
could I
there.
should have just led with that.
Right,
I
like
mean, because
right
I
there.
think because here's how I tell people that you're not fine, right? Because people say that they're not fine, but then they'll tell a memory, and then you know that if you're really hurting, some of us have the ability to share that memory like it just happened yesterday.
Yes.
And I'm like, but you're telling me something that happened 10 years ago, like it happened yesterday, and you're telling me that you're fine. I don't know if I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, healing is being able to have that memory, but again, it doesn't have power and dominion over you. You just have the memory, and then you've moved on,
Yeah.
right? So healing for me is so self-centered because it's like I know what I need. Healing in within my context is not contingent upon someone else.
A complete full circle. I don't know how we had such a perfect bow, but at the top of our conversation, you started with this topic, and literally as you said, the memory doesn't hold dominion over you anymore.
Mm.
The context at the top of the hour, I knew I was healed and I was free when I could talk about what happened to me without an ounce of anger, and like truly love and understood like am so released from it. I can talk about it. It's almost as though it is somebody else's story. And I think for those who are pursuing healing, when you are still angry and you're still hurting, you're still in the depths of the journey of healing, and it's
And,
connected to forgiveness.
and if I could put that in there, like, so I have to put in, some cartoon character. So for anybody that's ever watched The Avengers, and Hulk, right? I think it was Hulk in The Return of Ultron. And they were like, come on, we need you to be the Hulk. They were talking to Bruce Banner. They were like, we need you to get angry. We need you to be the Hulk. And Banner just turns around and says, I'm always angry. I've learned how to manage it, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
look at that, and feel like, and so many of our people have fake anger. Like so many of our kids are mocking or imitating the adults in their lives who are angry, but they're just mocking them, and they're like a fake angry because they don't have anything really to be angry about. They're just mocking the people that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They're imitating people that they're doing. So, like, this conversation is, for me, it's like, it's so baby step. Get comfortable with the baby step.
Get
Because I don't,
comfortable with the baby step. Yep.
so, because here's where I'm stuck, right? Because I feel like a lot of people that are advanced in the conversation, they have the conversations and it's like, and now let's talk about therapy.
Mm-hmm.
They're advanced in the conversation and they say, okay, well, let's talk about mindfulness, right? But I'm stuck because I don't see a lot of spaces where they say, like, can we just explore so that eventually we can get to that point?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a lot of those spaces, which is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create like a lot of just these basic spaces.
So, in our next conversation, I want to unpack how do we create these basic spaces so that we change the narrative for our children.
Well, we can't change the narratives until we change the parents and the pastors and the grand.
The communities. Yes, yes, yes.
Well, oftentimes
Yes.
the people don't understand the toxicity that they put when they put the words out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that in and of itself serves as yet another reason why, like, people have to be very mindful of words,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
People really, really understand the power of word. In Africa, they understood it because they called it domo, the power of the word. But I think oftentimes we take it for granted.
Well, we won't. Next week, when we come back, we
Looking
will
forward. I will
we
be
will
there in person,
finish.
but
Yeah, you're
I
gonna
will
be in person next time, next week. We'll
not be in a monkey suit. I
continue
promise.
this conversation, and we'll continue to unpack this healing conversation, this journey, going back to the basics, um, and being authentic with it. I
And
hope,
hey, real
yes.
quick, I want you to have a magnificent time at your event this weekend. And the thing is, it's
Thank you.
like, where are they for the men? So now you've inspired me to try to figure out how do we create this for men.
Hey, hey, there, I've tossed the ball to you.
There's
Tag
no,
you're
there's no
it.
we can't really say boyfriend weekend.
No,
We got
you
to figure out.
can't. You got to
We
figure
got
out
to. We
something
got to.
else.
We got to figure out something. We can call it.
And
We can call it. We can call it the men's emotional enema.
no one's signing up for that. No one's signing up for that. I'm
They
telling you
will.
now. No one's signing
That's
up
the
for that.
easiest way. That's the easiest way to release enema.
So, if you are wondering what Brandon is talking about and you haven't gotten your ticket yet for Girlfriend Gathering, there are only 2 days left, and we are talking about grace over grind, and in very much the context of how do we trade in this grind culture for grace, for us to be in a healthy place. So, if you haven't gotten your tickets yet, please go to my Facebook page. The link is there. I hope to see you either in person or virtual. But you, sir, are supposed to be here in person next week, and we will wrap up part 3 to this conversation. I thank you so much. Another powerful combo.
This is Dr. Jackson's Inner Thoughts. Get your tickets.
I can't with him. I can't with him. We'll see y'all next week. Same time, same place, right here on the flip side.
Enema, guys, gathering.
You know what?
Oh my God.